Hello and welcome to the Knowing Self, Knowing Others podcast. I'm your host, Nia Thomas. Join me as we talk to today's guest. Welcome to today's episode. I'm delighted to introduce our guest, Kate Jones, today. She's a visionary leader with over 30 years of experience in personal and organisational change. Kate founded Neon in 2013 to transform how we live, lead, and work through coaching and consulting. She specialises in creating deeply human organisational cultures, working with purpose-led leaders and teams to drive performance and impact without burnout. So whether you're a CEO looking to enhance leadership impact or an experienced professional seeking inspiration for your next chapter, Kate's insights can really guide you towards meaningful change. So get ready to be inspired by her passion for bringing more colour and humanity into the world. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
So tell us about Neon and what's this association with being deeply human and bright colours?
So I founded Neon in 2013, which was after 10 years of working in a management consulting company. And actually, I'd really enjoyed that time. Very different to the 10 years of social work and social care and probation work that I'd done before that. But I had found it quite a grey, metaphorically grey world. And I was in Scotland with my dear friend and my goddaughter, and we were trying to find a name for what was going to be my new company.
Okay.
And I was trying to describe, Isabel must have been about 11 at the time, if not younger, kind of what the company was about. And we came up with the word neon. So really the grey of many organisations for me, not just management consulting companies, but loads of organisations, really is about a more transactional way of doing things, a more mechanistic way of doing things, organisational cultures where people are not really connected to each other, where there's not a lot of creativity, as opposed to an organisation of metaphorical neon colours, which is more connected, more vibrant, more energetic, more human, all of those wonderful things that I believe in so strongly. And also in terms of individuals and how we live our lives. So many of us live a more faded out version of ourselves for reasons that, I sometimes do myself, I think for reasons of fear and habit and expectation. But when we find ways of really stepping into a different way of living, that for me is when we have kind of all our metaphorical colours switched on and we're living a more authentic life. We're finding ways of bringing who we really are more fully to the world, etc. So it's really about that. The grey to the neon.
That really is quite a beautiful description, and I'm reminded. I was speaking to Sophia Ponte on the podcast a couple of episodes ago, and she describes heavy and light cultures. And even though we're talking about weight, there's light and the neon. So yeah, there's definitely a connection there.
Crossover for sure, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So tell us, how does self-awareness fit into creating a deeply human organization?
Well, obviously, I kind of suspected that you might ask me that question, given what your podcast is about. But I'm going to struggle to say it in a short version. But I guess a lot of what I do is around leadership development. So what I'm kind of most passionate about is enabling leaders to develop the skills and attributes that they need to be able to develop what I call more deeply human cultures. And I'm the architect of the deeply human leadership model, which kind of describes the 5 C's of deeply human leadership. And one of those C's, maybe we'll come on to what the others are later in the conversation, but one of those C's is consciousness, which for me is all about emotional intelligence, about the ability to have self-awareness, to understand the impact that you're having as a leader, consciously or unconsciously, on the environment and on those around you. So it's a kind of key attribute for me of being a deeply human leader, is being able to understand yourself, the way that you come across when you're at your best, you're not at your best, trying your hardest to be at your best as much of the time as possible, such that you can have as useful and positive an impact as possible in your role as a leader. Yeah, so largely, I guess, about impact, being able to have as useful an impact as possible.
I really like that description, that consciousness. I ask so many people how they describe self-awareness and what does it mean to them? How do they define it? And that word doesn't come up very often. So I think I'll put it in my little book as one of those ways of describing self-awareness. I think it's one that people really do associate with. It's that switching on the light.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. As we're switching on a light kind of inside yourself. So I think often, I mean, in sort of 20 odd years of working with different kind of leaders and teams and organizations, especially when people are trying to lead change, they're always focusing on the external world and kind of what other people need to be doing differently and how other people need to change. And if only the team or the wider workforce would understand X, Y, or Z. And it's not always the case, but often it's the case that that leader is totally omitting to shine the light inwards and kind of say,
Yeah.
what is it about me that is either making this change difficult, or in what way am I standing in my own way of kind of enabling this change to succeed? How is it that I might need to change myself in order to enable this change to happen? So
Yeah,
yeah, it's
indeed.
definitely, yeah,
You can't change others, you can only change yourself.
exactly, yeah.
Indeed. So you've mentioned a little about leadership. How do you define a deeply human leader?
So that is the 5 C's of deeply human leadership.
Okay.
So, and interestingly, actually, this model I kind of came up with soon after I left my corporate consulting career and set up Neon. But at the time, it started off as the 4 C's.
Okay.
And it's become 5 in the last year. So I'll say a little bit about that. And also originally it was just the 4 C's of effective leadership. And then it was only about a year ago that I was doing a kind of my own little strategic review of my work as Neon. Neon was coming up to being 10 years old. And I thought, I just want to check whether I'm kind of, what is it that almost like the words that run through me and my work like a stick of rock, and these words kind of
Yeah.
deeply human sort of popped out of me. And, as all the textbooks say about purpose, when you kind of really kind of find an articulation of your purpose, it was just like a sort of thunk moment inside. It was like, that's it. And it's very much kind of what I'm about as a person myself, not just about the way that I work or the way that I see leadership. So the first of the 5 C's is clarity of purpose. So a deeply human leader is somebody who is really clear about what they stand for as a leader. So what they stand for from a values point of view, why they do what they do, but also somebody that can really bring that to life day to day in their organization. Because I think even in purpose-led organizations that I work a lot with, where ostensibly there's a very clear statement of purpose above the door in terms of what Oxfam will Save the Children or Shelter or whichever organisation it might be, what they do. Day to day, people can be so caught up in the hamster wheel of the slog and the grind that they don't necessarily feel very connected to purpose. So a deeply human leader is somebody that is able to create pathways to meaningful work for people on a day-to-day basis. So there's clarity of purpose. The second one is connection, which is all about relationship. So being able to create meaningful relationships of trust with people in your teams, people that you work with. I mean, I could probably talk for the whole podcast just about the relationship piece. The third C is the one that we talked about, is consciousness, which is about emotional intelligence and self-awareness and being a force for good, really, and kind of taking responsibility for your impact. The fourth C is creativity, which is really about creating environments of belief. So I think there are so many organizations where the workforce doesn't really believe that what they're doing is really adding any value, or they don't believe, again, particularly in purpose-led organizations, don't necessarily believe that they're going to achieve the kind of ambition of the organization because it's hard. So, a deeply human leader for me is somebody that can create a sense of possibility, that can instill in people a sense of belief and agency that they can actually influence and achieve what their ambition is. And then the fifth C, which is the one that is the newest, might seem a bit strange. It seems a bit obvious in a way that it is one of the 5, is care. So a deeply human leader for me is first of all somebody who, and this links, I think, to the self-awareness piece, somebody that is able to look after their own well-being. So I see self-care as being a prerequisite for effective
Yeah.
leadership, because the whole thing about putting your oxygen mask on before putting it on anybody else, you're not going to be of any use if you're exhausted or burnt out, etc. And secondly, care for the people that you work with, just caring about their well-being and the extent to which they are thriving in the environment that you are leading. So they're the 5 components for me of a deeply human leader.
And I'm really interested in that because so much of what you said, I'm drawing lines to my model of both self-awareness and my self-aware leadership compass. Because
Okay.
care is the first element or the first direction of my compass. And within my definition of self-awareness, there's reflection, recognition, regulation, and that recognition piece that you've talked about, impact. And the way that I describe my mission is about creating kinder, more respectful, and creative working relationships. So there
There's
are
a massive crossover.
lines to join us. It's
Yeah.
quite phenomenal in how that connection between that human or humanism or person-centered leadership, it really does connect with self-aware leadership.
Yeah, and I mean, you talk about kindness. I mean, kindness doesn't begin with C, but it could do. I could kind of, could quite
Yes.
because yeah, I'm a big believer in. It's funny actually, because a long time ago, I remember, probably about 10 years ago, I remember being in some sort of seminar thing where I heard the word grace being used in the context of there being, wouldn't it be amazing if there were more grace in the boardroom? And I mean, I remember it to this day, because I remember at the time it feeling like, I don't know, I think felt quite moved by it, but it was also such a strange word for me at that time, not long out of a corporate consulting career, to sort of find mentioned in the context of
Mm.
the corporate world. And then kindness is another one, which I don't think in the 10 years that I was working in the consulting company that I worked for, which, by the way, I loved and remain very loyal to. But I don't think I ever heard the word kindness used in the context of leadership or organisational culture. And yet, funnily enough, I think it was last year, I saw a report written by PA Consulting Group, I'll name them, they're the company that I used to work for, about leadership, and talking about one of the main attributes of effective leadership being the ability to be kind. And I was like, oh my goodness, even PA are now talking about it. So yeah, I love the idea. And for me, it fits both into the connection bit of the 5 C's and also obviously into the care bit. So yeah, there's lots of crossover between you and me and what we're up to, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think that there has been a shift over time? Because as you're saying about care and kindness, I've seen kindness as one of the values of NHS organisations, and I've seen it in, I guess, a few different organisations. But 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I wouldn't have seen the word kindness as one of the values of an
Yeah.
organisation. Are you seeing a shift toward, or I suppose from away from the industrial paradigm, traditional values to a more modern, person-centered values in organization?
If I'm really honest, I find it quite a hard question to answer, because it's a question that I ask myself all the time in
Mm,
terms of, how much of a difference am I making? To what extent are those of us that are banging this drum kind of still in a minority? And also because, I mean, obviously I'm surrounded by my client organizations, and I'm also surrounded by other consultants and coaches who are working in a similar space. And there's certainly, I mean, building on the point that I made about PA now writing as a big global consulting company, now producing thought leadership, which talks about kindness as an essential
mm,
leadership attribute. Equally, you have people like McKinsey who are writing a lot about the importance of well-being, which again, back in the day, it was kind of unthinkable to me that McKinsey would be writing stuff about the importance of well-being. So there's definitely a lot more, I'm going to say, rhetoric about it. It's definitely a lot more commonly found, I think, in literature around leadership development and organizational culture. And therefore, it's easier to have those kinds of conversations with client organizations, I think, and even to use some of that language. And at the same time, and going back to my deeply human language, which, as I said, I've really only been using for the last year and a half, I have found there's been such an amazing response in terms of people resonating a lot with that language. And hence I've set up this community called the Deeply Human Culture Club, which I set up at the beginning of this year, and which is essentially, there's about 60 people who've joined so far, who are in all kinds of different organizations in different geographies around the world, who all kind of resonate with this idea of deeply human leadership and deeply human cultures, organizational cultures. There's lots of signs in that respect of a shift in a certain direction, because I couldn't have imagined that, like 20 years ago when I first became a management consultant. And at the same time, I still think that there's a kind of, I don't know if it's a disconnect, but there's still a kind of gap between, it's almost like people's heart's desire for something different on a human level. They kind of like, yes, that is what I would love for myself, for my children, for my team. And yet at the same, there's a bit of a gap between that and then a sort of a mindset still that is stuck in a belief system that says, but this is just the world of work. This is just the way it is. So is it not still kind of cloud cuckoo land to imagine that we could run our organizations in a different way? But I mean, essentially that is, however cloud cuckoo land it might feel like, I feel like I'm on a mission to change the world of work. It's like, I do not accept that the only way to run our organizations is the way that we run them currently, whether they're corporate organizations, for-profit organizations, or purpose beyond profit organizations. What I see is the vast majority running on this paradigm of what I call the hamster wheel paradigm, which is where people are just running, frantically spinning, utterly exhausted, no time to actually think properly, no time to check whether they're doing the right things or in the best way, no time to connect with themselves or each other, sometimes no time even to have something to eat at lunchtime or go to the toilet. I mean, and I'm not exaggerating.
No, you're not.
And it's not only that it doesn't make sense from a human being point of view, given that I read somewhere that we spend something like on average 85,000 hours in our lives at work. So it's like, well, we might as well try to make that kind of vaguely enjoyable and not something that's detrimental to our health and well-being. But also from a performance point of view, I'm as big an advocate as anybody of organizations having the impact that they want to have and performing to the highest level possible. And the hamster wheel paradigm is short-termist, is short-sighted. Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. So yeah, it's a very long answer to your question, but I think there are some signs that it's shifting, but still I think there's a belief system that is very entrenched that says, well, that is just the way the world of work is, and how are we ever going to change it?
Yeah, I think there is a clear desire, there's an aspiration, and there's the rhetoric of where we want to go to. But I don't think we've worked out how we're going to do it yet. And what we also don't know is how are we going to put the closed sign up on the door long enough for us to work out how we are going to
Yeah,
do that and to make that change. So we are doing this peculiar thing where we are talking and wanting, but we are still on that hamster wheel and we
yeah,
don't know how to get off long enough to make a change. So it'll be interesting having these kind of conversations in 10, 15 years,
yeah.
whether we have started to move more towards that humanism and we are now starting to see more ideas of how we actually put this into practice.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's the biggest challenge, I think, for people who do the sort of work that we do, is to find new and creative ways of engaging organizations of many different kinds in the conversation. And sometimes it is about changing the language that you use. So sometimes I don't talk about deeply human leadership. Sometimes I talk about high performance leadership or high performance cultures. So it feels as though sometimes you kind of have to be a bit of a Trojan horse who kind of on the outside looks
Yeah.
as though, I have a kind of style that actually goes down quite well with the sort of classic corporates. I mean, I do a lot of work, for example, with a big engineering company. Engineers, the number of engineers over the years who said, "Oh, engineers don't do feelings," and like, yeah, okay. Actually, of course you do, because you're a human
Cool.
being. But
Yeah.
in that environment, I will kind of pitch myself and the work that I do in potentially quite a different way, but I'm still on the inside. I'm like sowing seeds of helping people create environments where people can actually be human beings rather than be treated and feel like and sometimes behave like machines or robots.
And one of the ways you help people to understand themselves is through your deeply human quiz. And
Yeah.
I love assessment tools that I think they always bring something and add something to your self-awareness. Tell us about your quiz.
Okay, so I actually have two quizzes, but the one that you're talking about is the one that is, I think it's how deeply human are you, essentially. So it's very short. I don't know how long it took you, but it usually takes about between 5 and 10 minutes,
I was
maybe.
going to
It's
say
not,
about 7 or 8 minutes. Yeah.
yeah. I think there's about 20 questions in it, about 4 different kind of sections, questions that are designed to help the respondent, the person completing the quiz, to ascertain. Some people complete it looking through the lens of themselves and their own leadership. Some people complete it through the lens of their organisation, so kind of taking a view of the characteristics of their organisational culture. But the aim is to get people thinking really about what a deeply human mindset or leadership style or culture might look like, and then they get it's all free. There's no charge for it, and you get a report with the kind of results and then some sort of pointers as to where you might focus, what you might focus on if you wanted to kind of improve your score. And you actually got a very high score, did you not?
I did. I got 86, and I don't know if
Yeah.
that's good or, but I was thinking because of the work that I do in the area that I'm interested in, I felt like I should have a higher score. So I think I'm going to go back to your recommendations that you share afterwards,
Yeah.
and I want to look at that because I want to be improved in that area. So, maybe in 6 months' time I can come back and do it and get 96 next time. But I think it was quite enlightening for me as somebody who thought that they were operating in a way that was deeply human. Again, maybe coming back to what we were talking about earlier, talk about it, understand it, talk about the academic side, but maybe in putting it into practice, you go back to what you know. So I thought it was very interesting and very helpful for me.
Well, that's good to hear. But I mean, the coach in me wants to say, Nia, do you really think that 86% is not a high score? Is my first kind of comment. But 86% is a high score. And I mean, it's quite interesting, actually, because I think usually going back to this question about how do we engage the people that have most work to do in these
Yeah.
processes. So of the people that complete the quiz, there is obviously there's a range, but I would say there are probably more people who complete it that get it, who get the value, get what deeply human leadership is, who understand, who make that connection between well-being and performance, who kind of understand the connection between leadership and culture and performance, all of those things. And so it's not, because there are some people, I would say I've seen scores kind of as low as, I don't know, between 30 and 40%. There are some people that have completed it that I know the individuals who've completed it. And I think, really, you've scored, going back to that self-awareness point, right? The answers that you put in are only a reflection of the way in which you view yourself, and therefore it's definitely the case that I can think of a couple of people off the top of my head. I'm like, oh, I definitely wouldn't score you as high as that. So it's not intended to be a scientific, academic, kind of exhaustive survey, but it does, I think, get people thinking. And so some of the questions that are in there, I think I always find the answers quite interesting. I think there's one about the extent to which the purpose, because there's a section on purpose, the extent to which you think that the purpose on the outside of the organization is reflected on the inside, because that's, my whole thing about the definition of a deeply human organization is one that is a force for good on the outside in terms of the actual work that it does and the impact that has on the world, but also the extent to which it's a force to good on the inside in terms of the environment that it creates and the degree to which people feel purposeful and motivated and able to thrive. And often that's one of the questions where people often say there's a disconnect. And another one is, I think one of the questions is, to what extent do you really believe, if you're really honest, to what extent do you think that your leadership is as much of a force for good as you would like it to be, or something words to that effect. And again, I mean, that's obviously a kind of self-assessment, but a lot of people will say, I think there's one answer is, I know I could do better, or I know there's more work for me to do here. But But yeah, I mean, I'd really encourage people to take it, because it just sort of gets you dips your toe in the water, really, of the deeply human leadership and culture stuff.
And listeners, watchers, I would definitely recommend share this quiz with people who don't usually fill out these kind of quizzes,
Oh yeah,
because I think,
yeah.
as Kate was saying, we are often preaching to the choir, because you come to these podcasts, to these quizzes, because you are already interested in the subject. When we are talking about human leadership, whether we're talking about self-aware leadership, it's often the people who are not in this space who need to hear about it, who need to learn about it, and need to develop their own skills in this area. So share, share, share.
Oh, totally. That would be amazing. Absolutely. Get it in front of the people who you're like, really, I really want him or her to kind of think about this. Like, just it, yeah, see if you can bring it to those people. That would be fantastic.
Yes, that's today's call to action.
Yeah.
You are a graduate of the Bert Hellinger Institute, and I'm not sure whether I've pronounced that
Yeah, yeah,
properly,
yeah.
in the Netherlands, and you are trained in systems thinking. How does systems thinking help you when you're working with organizations and really helping them to become more human?
Yeah. It's a great question. So the Bert Hellinger, for those that don't know, was the sort of original founder of family systems thinking and constellations, which I'm not going to attempt to explain in any detail, but one of the kind of tenets of constellations and systems thinking is that patterns of behavior can be passed down across generations within families, but also the work is increasingly sort of entered into the world of organizations. And so it looks into the history of an organization, traumatic events and the lifetime of an organization. There are certain sort of principles of healthy systems as defined by systems thinkers that you can use to sort of inform your understanding of how healthy or not an organizational system or a family system. I don't work with families, but or a team. I mean, a team is obviously an example of a system, how healthy or unhealthy they are. And I don't know what the statistics are of how many healthy family systems there are in the world, but I would imagine that the statistics are quite low. Maybe I'm talking from my own experience. I don't know, but equally, there's lots of reasons why organizational systems can struggle, essentially. And what's interesting about it, apart from anything else, is that individuals operating in those systems, sometimes it's as though systems have a life of their own. And so there will be patterns of behavior that will unfold almost regardless of which individual or individuals are holding those positions. So, I mean, obviously, kind of systems thinking is a huge area, but I think in simple terms, what it does, it helps us understand the multifaceted nature of individuals, teams, and organizations, and how they are impacted by the variety of different systems of which they're a part. So if you were to draw a little picture of you as an individual and think about all the systems in which you work, family system, a school system, an educational system, a community system, a professional system in terms of your maybe educational background, your organizational system, your team. I mean, there'd be, tens and 20s and 30s and 40s of systems. So I think what it does is, in some ways, systems thinking is a deeply human lens of looking at why people behave in the way that they do, and the ways in which we are impacted by the systems in which we are operating, and just how complex that is, given how many overlapping systems are constantly, the interconnectedness of everything, really. There's John Whittington is a very well-known organizational systems person based, I think, still in London, and does a lot of work in constellations. And I did some training with him as well. And he always talked about the peacock tail. And I use this actually quite a lot when I'm working with teams in particular, is getting people to imagine the sort of peacock tail of systems of which they are or have been a part, kind of fanning out behind them like a peacock tail.
Okay.
And it just gives people a kind of sense of the complexity of context in which they operate and the ways in which it affects them. So yeah, I think it provides just an additional level of context and understanding when working with individuals, teams, and organizations, because of course none of us are operating in isolation from anything or anybody, much as some of us might like to. We just don't. There is a kind of a web of connectedness that links all of us in some way, shape, or form.
That's a wonderful description of a peacock tail, because we
Yeah.
often talk about the baggage that we bring, don't we? And the
Yeah.
heaviness, and it holds you down and it pulls you back. But actually, for many of us, it just colors our experience. It teaches us things, and it's allowed us to grow and to be where we are. So I quite like that idea of peacock tail. Peacock tail. I think it's far more positive than the way that we usually talk about it.
Yeah. But of course, I mean, as you say, we're often not necessarily aware of it, or there'll be parts of our, let's call it the peacock tail, that we are much more aware of than other parts of the peacock tail. So, another way in which a systems approach can be helpful is enabling people to increase their self-awareness, really, about the ways in which their peacock tail, that sort of myriad of contexts and systems or worlds, mini worlds in which they operate, are causing them to behave in the way that they behave. And then that enables them to have more choice about the extent to which they're going to make the same decision again, whether they're going to behave in the same way again, or whether they're going to make a different choice.
Very interesting. And we could probably had a very long conversation about that, let
Yeah.
alone all the leadership
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
that we can talk
Yeah.
about. For people in midlife who are seeking new direction, how do you help people to navigate the transition and find fulfillment in that new chapter?
Yeah. So this is going into the sort of other bit of my work. So I reckon probably about 80% of my work is organisationally and leadership focused. So all about the kind of deeply human leadership stuff, where I'm mainly, it might be leadership strategy, or it might be helping a team improve the way in which it works together, or it might be working with a cohort and designing a leadership development program for a cohort of leaders, or working with individual leaders in one-to-one executive coaching programs. But the other bit is helping people in, I say midlife. I mean, I'm in my mid-50s, so I mean, I don't know. I don't. What would you say midlife? I sort of say between 35 and 55. But the
Yeah,
older I get, the more I'm stretching
absolutely.
the midlife bracket. But obviously, it's that kind of classic time where people's sense of identity and people's sense of what's important to them starts to shift. Sometimes because there's a major life event, a bereavement, or a loss of a breakdown of a marriage, or some kind of ill health or redundancy, or something of that kind. But sometimes it just happens. There's the kind of, as Joseph Campbell would put it, there's the call to adventure, quote unquote. There's that sort of whisper in your ear that says to you, is this it? Like, is there not more to life than this? And I think I was talking about, I was just drafting it, one of my newsletters today, and I was mentioning there's a book by James Hollis, which is about basically that period of midlife and kind of finding meaning in the second half of life. And, he talks about the fact that phase one of our adult life is usually about sort of proving ourselves in some way, shape, or form, being a success, whatever that might mean. And then the second half of life is usually about finding meaning. So typically, actually, it's interestingly, a lot of the people that come to me in this bit of my work, which is largely around individual, let's call it life coaching, if you like, a lot of those people are people who are wanting to get off the hamster wheel that I work with in the leadership bit. So people who are sick and tired of the rat race or the corporate world, who are exhausted, who want to spend more time with their families, who want their work to have more meaning than making whatever kind of money they're making or the next promotion. And I was just like, I want something more than this. Thank you very much. And some people know what it is that they want. So for example, I was working not so long ago with somebody who was in professional services and very successful, had a great kind of, great potential for further promotion. But they were dissatisfied. And actually what was really important for them was that the creative part of themselves had more of a place at the table in their day-to-day life. So some people come with a kind of clear kind of longing or dream, if you like. And the question is, oh, is that possible? How can I get there? What do I do? Can you help hold me to account for actually doing something about this rather than just ignoring it and pretending that it's not there. Some people come just at the stage of knowing, having that kind of sense of dissatisfaction and that sense of there has to be more to life than this. I'm really miserable, but I have no idea what it is that I want, and I feel completely stuck. And often they've been stuck in that place for a really long time. And actually, so in terms of the quiz, I actually have a second quiz, which is about how ready are you for a new beginning, which again, kind of same idea. It's short and doesn't take very long. And obviously you get sent your results and stuff, but that is designed to kind of get people thinking about, is this just a bit of a bad day? Or is this symptomatic of something more fundamental that needs to change? And what is it that's holding me back? So the questions in there about self-confidence versus self-doubt. There's questions in there about your appetite for risk. There's questions in there about the degree to which you consider yourself to be a free agent who can sort of make whatever decisions that they want, no matter what the impact is, versus somebody who has responsibilities and feels as though those that are dependent on them are going to be at risk if they make certain choices. So yeah, and I love that part of my work. It's very different, but I think one of the things that makes it so enjoyable is that usually those people who want that kind of coaching really, really want it. They're paying themselves, they've got a lot of skin in the game, and yeah, it's definitely very deeply human work, I think.
And very connected to your other part, particularly when you get
Yeah.
to late 40s like me, and you're wondering what's the next big adventure. So I will go back to your website and do the other quiz as well, and I'll make sure that the links are in the show notes too.
Thank you.
Before we finish, so I've been developing this idea over the last couple of months, and I recently wrote an article, and anybody who's heard me speak, I'm a little bit obsessed with the Substack right now. So I've written an article on Substack about hyperhumanism and ultra digitalism. And I've got this vision that we're on this seesaw, and as we move towards ultra digitalism, we want to balance it with hyperhumanism. And
Mm-hmm.
the more we go in one direction, we're going to want to and need to balance it with the other side of the seesaw. So what are your thoughts on this humanism in the workplace as we become more digitally reliant?
Well, have you written the article, by the way? Because I'd love to
I
see
have.
it.
I have. It's out. It's in the world.
Oh, great. I had to track it down. Well, the first thing I would say is that I think that the increase in all things digital, AI, etc., is only adds fuel to the fire of the necessity of preserving and building on our most precious resource, in my view, which is our humanity.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
in some ways, I think that it does only add to the imperative to do that rather than the opposite. And also, I mean, I'm by no means an AI expert, goodness gracious me. But what I would say is that one thing that a robot will never be is a human being. So the bits of ourselves that I think, which I am, most interested in, which are all baked into this sort of notion of deep humanity, are the bits I think that AI is least likely to be able to reach or replicate. So in some ways, I am not overly well. I'm not as I am concerned about it, but I'm not as concerned about it as I think other people might be for that reason. But equally, I was at a conference recently where somebody was talking specifically about AI, and he was talking about, apparently there's a very famous study that was done of a community in Austria some decades ago where the whole community was made, they lost their jobs. I think it was in some industrial town, and the impact of unemployment on that community. And the link with AI is that obviously AI is already kind of taking over, making obsolete certain jobs that were done by human beings before, and the profound impact that might have, at a kind of large scale. Because one of the fundamental things that I think we have as human beings is the need to feel useful, the need to feel as though there's a reason for us to get out of bed in the morning.
Yeah.
When yeah, that sort of existential, what's the point of being here? But having a reason to get out of bed in the morning kind of helps you just kind of get through the day, even if on a sort of deep philosophical level, you might not necessarily feel hugely kind of connected to a sense of purpose. So I think there are, and also AI is a massive threat to that, I think. But I feel like that's always my phrase. Our deepest humanity is our most precious resource in terms of how we live, how we lead, and how we work. So let's do what we can to look after it.
I would agree. Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me, Kate. I've really had a great conversation, and I've got some things that I need to go back and check on. I've got an action plan that I can work on, and I've got another quiz that I can go and learn more about myself from as well. So that's really wonderful. Kate, thank you so much for joining me. It's been brilliant.
Thanks so much, Nia. Thanks for having me.
The Knowing Self, Knowing Others podcast has a new feature. You can now send a text message directly to the show. Check out the show notes in your favorite podcast player, and in the top left of the notes, you'll see a link to Text the Show. Click on it to be taken to your messaging app and send a text directly to Nia and this week's guest. Join the community and be a part of our learning journey.
Thank you for joining me on today's show, where we discuss self-aware leadership with thinkers from around the globe. If you want to make sure that you keep in touch with what's going on in the world of self-aware leadership, head over to my website and sign up to my newsletter. Looking forward to having you on my learning journey.